Hey guys, so today I'm going to be going over item tier list I made a couple of days ago and I have updated. This is the final iteration for patch 14.15, the release patch for set 12, and it's going to be based on slamming. So what a slam is I think it's a pretty important fundamental to learn of TFT, and it's basically not just understanding why you should build an item, but when you should do it. So um, I would say the moment you get the ability to make an item, understanding if yes you should make it or no you shouldn't make it immediately is like the key idea behind slamming. For instance, a high like a S tier slam item like Rageblade has three qualities I'd say that are very important. So every item is judged on these three qualities. Anything in S tier will have all three basically, and then something like D tier will have none of them, and then B will like have like pros and cons like depending on your spot. So the first quality is going to be how good is it early on. This can come in a variety of ways, like the amount of item holders. So if there's like for instance, you can have like Cassiopeia, you can have early Jinx, you can have even Ziggs, you can have Cassidon. A lot of people can hold Guinsoo early on. Two, it's really strong early on. If you build it, your board will get a lot stronger. And then thirdly, well, actually, we're going to the next topic now, but that's the first one. How good is it early on? The second part is how good is it late? So if I slam this, will it cut off a lot of options, or will they be like meta options? Something like Deathblade. I build it. I'm playing AD at this point. That's why it's so low on the list because not only is AD bad in the meta, but I lose about 50% of the comps I can play in TFT all of a sudden in that game. So like if I roll down, I see like a 4 cost AP carry, I can't even buy that in the shop because I have a Deathblade. That's obviously not true for like every scenario. You can obviously play like Karma plus a Fiora, but um, this set's pretty flexible, so you can probably get away with it. But there's other reasons why Deathblade's so bad. The third and final one is how how does it affect your component economy? So that's probably the hardest concept to understand is components are valued at sorry, it's like the idea of like value the idea behind the value of components is probably the concept that's hard to understand. So it's pretty simple to understand like what components are good and what are bad generally. That's going to be like something I can show here, right? If you look at the left side, I built like a tier list. So this is probably like S tier. You can build like a lot of things with tier rod belt. So not only can you build a lot of things with belt, you can also they're very strong, right? So everything here I'm okay with slamming. Like these are amazing. Redemption is really good later on, so I'm okay with that. Guardbreaker is probably the worst one. Um, Something like Bow is in A tier, a bit lower than that because while I can make Rageblade, which is by far the best item in the game, the other options are a bit lacking. Like Runons, Titans, Giant Slayer are a bit on the weaker side. Admittedly, Shiv, Red Buff, Runa, or Nashor, Last Whisper are great items. I just think it lacks a bit of value in if you're playing towards like AP comps where you can't really use too many bows. It's a lot easier now because Red Buff exists and Shiv does, Nashor's as well. But traditionally, it's or even now having too many bows in an AP comp can be a negative. But yeah, so one last thing I will say, like you can probably get an idea of like yourself how good these components are, judging by what they make. But Glove is by far the worst. It doesn't make any good items besides Steadfast, and Steadfast is only good because, well, not only, but half the value of Steadfast is the fact that it kills a glove. The best glove item, that's the only item that's in S tier, is going to be TG, and the whole idea of TG is that you can kill 2 gloves to make a better item. That's not a glove item. So it's a very high tempo item. It's good early, it's good late, and it's kills. It has good item component economy. So it fills all 3 roles. That is why it is in S tier along with Rageblade. So that's the introduction for how these are rated. I'll go over a couple of these. I won't try to like go over each one. Maybe I will, but I'll go over them in like groups. So, for instance, Rageblade fills all 3 conditions. Right, it's one of the best items early. It's needed on units. A lot of the meta units, like you need it on Callista for the most part. You need it on like Cassiopeia, or it's really really good on Syndra. A lot of, if you go here, right, I listed all the units that use Rageblade. Half these units here benefit with like really well with having 2 of them, right? Like double Rageblade Syndra is like, I don't know when this post will come out, but if people haven't realized yet, double Rageblade Syndra is like best in slot over Nashor's. It's really close between Nashor's, but it depends on your front line. Double Rageblade Cassiopeia is really good. Rageblade plus Shojin is a really good combination for a lot of units. And yeah, so I think I don't really have to make a huge argument about why it's an S tier. You guys will have played some games of set 12 by now. Moving on, Stoneblade, Dragon's Claw, both really good early on. Later on, you can't find anything, any units that can't hold these. Any comp will have a user for these. Declaw has more value later on because of the max HP scaling, while Stoneblade has more value on earlier, because it's harder to position like a unit by itself late game because you have so many units, and but early game it's very good because you're getting a lot of value for only 2 components. Sorry. Moving on to the anti-heal section. Anti-heal will always be good. Like 99% of comps will always need it, and then like the last 5% or like last 1% will be like benefit a lot just from having it. What I mean by that is there are some comps that just like burst down carries, and then, like they don't really have a chance to heal up, so you don't really need it. But just having like a source of burn is good in general. But yeah, outside of that, it follows the same rules. Burn is like really strong early. Any direct damages, like Spark and Shiv as well, and you're not going to go wrong with slamming a Sunfire early on. Later on, it's a bit more questionable, but early on, it's probably a really good slam. Probably better than Morello in some spots if you have like a really tanky front line. Spark and Shiv, again, I'm repeating myself a lot here, but it's good early, good late, does direct damage, so it's strong. You always need Shred later on if you're playing AP. Can't go wrong with these. Shojin, really good item holders. Really good later on. Really good in Fast 9 if like Xerath can hold it. Morgana to an extent. Basically every unit in the game that it's in the backline can hold it. So again, it's like Rageblade. I don't have to argue about that one. Steadfast, I could see it in A tier as well, but this comp's more like this tier list is about how readily will I be slamming these items the moment I get the components for them. And for Steadfast, it's more about like, it's more about a chain and glove. Like I'm not going to be holding out for any better items, right? Like I can understand if I have a tier and I don't make a vow right away, like a tier and a chain, because I need to find a blue buff for my Karma, or I need to hold on to tier for Shiv because I need Shred. I don't have it yet. But for chain and glove, there's nothing I would ever hold out chain for or glove. So I'm gonna make Steadfast like almost every time the moment I get it. It is a very good tank item though. I'd say like this is probably like second best tank item technically. It's hard to rate tank items. It's based on the carry and whatnot. But yeah, moving on. A tier. These are more items that I would have to. There's like it's not like a 100% slam every time. It's more like it's a bit more conditional. For example, like Bramble is very good. Kills 2 chains you don't really care about. Really good early game because it does direct damage. By the way, if you guys don't know what direct damage is, it's just like item damage, like Sunfire burns or Spark does the magic damage. That's just what direct damage. Bramble does magic damage as well when it gets attacked. The only issue is that if you scout around and there's no AP users or like no AD users, sorry, then it's not as strong. Obviously, it loses a lot of value. So I would probably hesitate a bit before slamming, and it does fall off a bit late game. Warmogs, really good value early on. I'm just a bit hesitant about using both my belts if I get it, because they are pretty common Morello holders, and Morello is really, really important. And then the other belt is also valuable. It can make like Redemption. It can make Steraks. Not yeah, Steraks. It can make Nashers. So I hesitate a bit, but for the most part, really good early on. Steraks Gage is basically like Warmogs. It was used to be like better than Warmogs before Warmogs was buffed. Now sorry, the idea, like if you guys didn't know, if there was any unit that was above 2700 HP, Steraks Gage was just better, because it gave more HP overall. And but now with like Warmogs buff, I think it's 2700 now, or like 3000, somewhere between there. So it's a bit more of a choice. So yeah, it's really good. It's because it's flexible. Late game, if you're playing AP and you want to kill sword, it's there to be a tank item. If you are playing AD and you need it like for a Fiora or like for a Briar, it's there for you, a great item. But the issue is that obviously because it scales off percentage HP, it will be weaker early game where you have less HP. That goes for a lot of items like Giant Slyaer, which we'll talk about later, but obviously less, again, weaker units, sorry, less bulky units early on means weaker early on. Same thing with Redemption. That's why it's B tier. Really, really good later on. Really not that great early on. Red buff. We don't talk. Red buff is a great slam because it's anti-heal again, but it's also a way to kill bows in your AP comp. Helm, basically the AP of Steraks Gage, mana item or tank item, can't go wrong. Evenshroud, Last Whisper are basically the equivalents of Sunder for AD. The reason it's a bit lower is because I think it provides less tempo somewhat, and because the meta is very AP orientated. These don't lead to as good of units as comps as these two. Like this is going to like Karma, Syndra, obviously really strong comps at the moment, but these are like going to Callista, Smolder. AD is just not that great. Callista is very good, but you know Syndra 2 is winning the lobbies, right? So hard to fight that. Rabadons, if you look at my previous draft, you'll see that Rabadons is like S tier, but after like seeing how dominant like the meta is with AP units that don't need Rabadons, it's definitely fallen out of favor. The item quality is insanely high. It's like the best AP item you can get in the game at the moment. That's not Radiant or Artifact, but first of all, it uses 2 rods, which are very hard to come by if you're playing AP, because like it's like Spark, Rabadons, that's 3, and then a third AP item or a second AP item is going to be like JG or Gunblade, that's another rod, and Archangels, that's probably like 5 rods. So most times, if you have, let's say you get dropped, I don't know, on Krugs you get dropped glove, 2 rods, glove, and a sword. You're not going to be making Rabadons plus an IE in that situation. You're going to be making JG and Gunblade, because you'd rather have 2 good items over 1 amazing item and 1 item you can't use at all, right? Like, how are you going to make IE work in a AP comp? Even if you wait and lose some HP, like if you don't slam the IE, you're losing HP, right? Because people will be slamming their items and higher elos. And then what do you make out of the glove and the sword, right? The glove you want to kill as soon as possible, so you're not really greeding for anything. The Shojin, you could probably be waiting for the sword. You'll probably be waiting for Shojin, but outside of that, you really have nothing to like greed for. Crown Guard, really good early, falls off somewhat late, uses a rod, so I'm a bit hesitant to put in S tier. But I like the item a lot. I think it's really good early game. It's just the fact that it uses rod and a rod heavy meta that I'm a bit concerned about slamming immediately. Okay, so let's talk about like healing items, and then we'll cover like some of the egregious items that you should be avoiding this set. Healing is never going to be higher than like a B tier in my opinion, because unless there's like a unit that's like based around healing, because healing scales off the damage you do more so than other items, because like if you do like a Gunblade Ziggs 2 versus a JG Ziggs 2, the JG one's always going to win, right? Because you do more damage and you don't really care about healing until you're taking damage. So it's a lot better than last set because there are more more healing item holders early on. Last set we had Darius 2, that was like the prime example, and there was no other AD or BT slash Gunblade item holders early on, in my opinion, that were like good enough for you to streak with. Kha'Zix was terrible. Probably Kindred. Like for Gunblade, there's like some backliners that could probably use it, but you much rather use the Rod for other stuff. But this set we have Caston, we have Elise, we have Jace, we have some Nyla is like okay with it. We have Akali that's okay with it. That's like three really good and like two other like solid holders of it. It does also go into great users like Fiora loves having PT, and that's part of the reason why healing items also can't be like lower than can't be too low like in D tier, because while it may not be good early, for a unit that needs a healing item, they need it, right? For like, that's a redundant thing to say, but like Fiora without a BT or healing item is basically useless, right? She'll die within like the first 5 seconds. It's the same idea as Karma without a blue buff, or any mana item without or any AP caster without a mana item, or Kalista without a Rageblade. Right? If you, it's like it's not negotiable. Like Rabadons, you don't need it technically. You can get away with combining like a JG and a Nashers or whatnot, but healing is something like you need on the melee units. IE, I'm going to talk about IE and JG real quick because they're crit items, and you might be a bit confused as to why IE is so low. IE basically loses a lot of value early game. It's weak early and whatever late game. So early, its identity is giving your unit the ability to crit. So, and crit scales off how much AD you have, right? Early game, you're not going to have a lot of AD. First of all, you have lower cost units, like 1 and 2 costs. Second of all, sometimes your traits won't be activated. So like Hunter is like often not activated early with like Jinx. You won't be getting that AD. It might not be upgraded, right? If you have like a 3 cost your item holder, obviously it's not going to be upgraded by like until like stage 3 or 4. And you won't have other items, right? If you have a Deathblade plus IE is an amazing slam. But a naked unit with an IE, it's going to be at its weakest. So that's why IE falls off there. And late game, you might think there's a lot of holders for it, but Varus is the only unit that really wants IE. The other units the other units don't really care about it. Like Kalista does not care about having IE. It's nice on her, but you have Rageblade, you have Fairy Crown, and then third item is going to be a second Rageblade, or it can be a Deathblade, or it can be Last Whisper, or Gunblade. Last Whisper is probably the best one, but IE does not really make the list of things that she needs. And even late game, like Smolder doesn't really care about it. Smolder like doesn't care about it at all. Actually, he much prefers like attack speed. So yeah, so that's why IE is kind of low on the list, and JG is sort of similar, but more about the fact that it's just there to kill Glove, and it will always be weaker than Rabadon's unless you have like more than 400 something HP, which is not realistic for the most part. Blue buff, there's like no early item holders except Zoe and like Ahri. I'm not a huge fan of Ahri as item holder. I think she's too inconsistent. But it has value because Karma is such a good unit, and Karma like significantly gets better with the blue buff over other mana items. Runons is like prime example of an item that's really really good early on, and but has no good late game holders. I don't think since set 6 Runons has ever been in has ever been like best in slot for any unit. So it is the like poster child for a tempo item. You can slam it and it'll give you a lot of tempo. Like you can slam it on like a hunter unit, that anything that has a lot of AD already, and then if you can make it to best case scenario, you're gonna go to Fast 9 and put on Smolder, who is probably the best user of it late game. But if you can't, you kind of have to like either commit to Jinx or play around Kalista, and you're gonna have to accept that Kalista has not the perfect items, but hopefully the tempo you receive from slamming this early is enough to carry you, to Fast 9 after you hit Kalista and like cap out on 9 with Kalista. But yeah, we talked about Vow. I think Vow is like is basically scales off how good your cast is, and or the later the game is, the better units you have and the better cast you have. Just compare the cast quality of a Tahm Kench casting versus, I don't know, a Blitzcrank casting. They're both good, but obviously one was a lot more impactful. So good later on, not much value early on, but it's still a tank item in a sense. So if you have to slam it, you slam it, and you'll find a use for it later on. But it kills tier, so be careful about that. Deathblade, terrible late game, or terrible, not bad early game, just no one holds it late game. Like Varus is the only one. Varus is like terrible in the stats. Titans, people asked about this on Twitter. I don't think it's very good right now, or it will ever be this set. Anyone that can hold it late game and that does well with it will also do well with any other item. So there's no benefit to making it, and no one can use it early on. It's just I think it's all around a bad item. Fiora is probably the best user of it, but again, she can hold any other item besides Titans and do fine. Hodge BT +1, right? It could be that +1 could be Steraks. It can also be another BT. That could be IE even. That could be Spark, or sorry, not Spark. Evenshroud. It could be QSS. Speaking of QSS, I raised it from D tier to C tier because of Mordekaiser essentially. Mordekaiser is like insanely good right now, and it's actually like really good on stats for him, which kind of makes sense when you think about how he's a 40 mana unit that gets tanky because he casts a lot, right? Like if you look at, let's see, like Mordekaiser right now, to look at the stats a bit. Let's go like 2+, probably 2+, because sometimes you 3-star him a lot, right? It's because of the 4 Vanguard meta. This is place change for items and like builds. Yeah. So where is items? Like unit delta or like that. So we have to get rid of, okay, ignoring obviously all these items like that are like artifact and stuff, and like units with like small sample size. Always adaptive is by far, like not by far, but probably his best item. You got like that's low sample size. You want at least 1,000. This is pretty close, but not quite. QSS is like 200, and he doesn't do like that bad with it. So if you combine that with the fact that you can put it on Kassadin, Jax, it's like best in slot for Kassadin, then it sort of raises, like, I don't think it can be quite as bad as the other units and other items in D tier. I would leave it in D tier, honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that Mordekaiser is a unit that you can move it onto later on, right? Like if slamming QSS forces you to like commit Kassadin when you're contested, just having ability to like put it on someone later on and like actually have value is, I think, enough for it to like buff it up. There are a lot of good 5-cost users for it, but it has like no early game power, right? So you can't use the same argument as Radon's Hurricane, as like, because you're not going to get the value early game to make it to Fast 9 with QSS. So yeah, that's what I'd say about that. If someone said like they think it's D tier, I would probably just be like, okay, I can see it there. I'm not really going to argue. I know a lot of people have been vouching for QSS, and I think the amount the amount of stats it gives you is like what, I think 58% attack speed overall, and immunity plus like what, 25 MR, and ability to spec into crit builds. All that sounds good enough to like be a good item, but like the CC immunity part is so like first rate. Like if the unit doesn't need CC, it's useless. If it needs CC, it's like the best item on it, which makes it like have such a weird identity, and also like the fact that it's useless early on. So honestly, I've been saying this a lot. I think they should just rework the item altogether and like leave CC immunity to like artifacts or like augments. But that's getting off topic for the video. So yeah, I probably wouldn't build it early on, but if I had Kassadin or Jax and I could play reroll, then I could definitely see myself playing them. But yeah, but again, this is a tier list based on how often I would make these the moment I get the items for it, and that's why Edge of Night, Giant Slayer, and Guardbreaker are all D tier, because I would almost never ever make these guys early on. So Giant Slayer is obvious. Even considering how bad it is early on, I think that even if you fulfill the conditions, it is not a very good item. The amount of stats it gives you, it's been reworked to this weird spot where, like, they want to make it good for AP, but now it's just like mediocre on both, unless it's like a third item and you already have a bunch of stats for your unit somehow, like with augments. Edge of Night is like doesn't do anything early game. Probably might be worse than QSS in terms of tempo, and no one needs it late game. Guardbreaker is only better, like it's only good as an item if you have a crit build. So if you have IE or JG already, and then even then it's like about the same level as a regular item. So without it, it's like worse than a regular item, and it doesn't give you enough stats, right? Like it won't show here because the API is kind of wonky right now for the site, but it is not just not subpar in all aspects. But yeah, that's why I would not slam Guardbreaker, and this was basically my rundown of the tier list that I made. I had some questions, and I want to on other platforms, and I want to give a more in-depth rundown. I'll be trying to do this every patch, I think. I'm not going to do like a full rundown, but I'm going to be releasing like a meta report, and then I'll be covering like what changes on the tier list. So if you're interested to see that and this video helped you, then leave a like, subscribe, the usual. Check out our Twitter where we post these more bite-sized and text form type posts. Check out our Discord. We do free coaching every week on Saturdays if I can make it. Not every week because sometimes there's no time for me. But yeah, check out TikTok, the usual and stuff. And I'll see you guys in the next video.